Decide to either fuel your dream or fuel the reasons why you can't. The option is yours, and you're always at the helm of choice, and trust that your dream can come true.
How do you measure abundance in your life? Is it position, title, financial wealth, the latest or best cars, electronics, or fancy restaurants? Sure, from a societal standpoint, these are all outward manifestations of abundance. Let me propose an alternate measurement. Your soul coming alive, guided by your passion and your principles, alignment across all areas of your life, pure, unbound potential. If this sounds too good to be true, consider changing the lens through which you view your life. This life is available to you, but you won't find it in any pill or quick fix seminars. It takes vulnerability, honesty, authenticity, and courage. You've got this. Easy day.
Welcome to the most exciting adventure of your life. Welcome to a new way of living, and welcome to the 5 Mountain Adventures podcast. Hi, I'm Casey.
And I'm Andy. And we help people feel better and thrive in stressful times. Our goal for this year is to help 5,000 people not only feel better, but to thrive in these stressful times via our podcast and mental fitness one-on-one and small group coaching. You can help us reach our goal by rating and sharing our podcast and following us on Instagram and YouTube.
Help us raise the vibration of our world, moving from anger, fear, and division to courage, understanding, and compassion. It starts with us. And today we are speaking with Jessie Torres, a high-performance coach, author, speaker, and transformational leader. She's inspired by reaching the darkest moments of her life. Jessie reached a critical point of physical drain that was taking over her life, and she had zero fulfillment and was losing her relationships. She knew there was more to her life, and she was determined to achieve it. With this burning desire and 19 plus years of education and peak performance, heart intelligence, emotional intelligence, mindfulness, and working with the largest coaching company in the world, Jessie developed the Fierce Grace method. She successfully helped thousands live with passion and purpose and the highest levels of fulfillment without losing her mind, health, or family. She's the mother of 3 grown children that are also committed to changing the world. Welcome, Jessie Torres.
Thank you so much. What a beautiful introduction. Wow. I'm like, wow. Thank you. Appreciate that.
We appreciate your feedback there as well. And we like to open by finding out what our guests are most curious about right now.
Well, I love the introduction and what you guys are up to. So I'm always curious as to how to reach even more people, to help them understand that they can alchemize their pain and turn it into something beautiful, a life of passion and purpose. So I'm always curious as to what that next level is and how to reach people that might be even in the darkest moments.
Oh, I love that. And I think that's a great lead in to, we love hearing about origin stories and, what got you from that dark place to the path that you're on today. If you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit of your journey there.
Yeah, for sure. And to initially answer that question, in which I speak on a lot, because often we don't think we have power to change our dynamic in the world. And honestly, what woke me up was an act of kindness. And it seems like it might be something so small to most, but because I was living in such a dark place, that one act short-circuited me. It was like if there was one little flicker left in my being, because at the time I was very apathetic and just really was wishing somebody would blow the red light and take me out, that whatever spark was left, this act from these people, it opened something up. I thought, I don't even know what this is, but whatever it is, if this feeling is available, then life is worth living. So backpedaling to the journey, I was, my first 18 years of life was living in my home with my mom, my dad, and my older brother. And until my little brother came when I was 13. But throughout all that time, I was being sexually abused by my father. And so I was warding him off, building traps, trying to, warn me when he'd get there. I tried to tell my mom when I was 16, and I use the word molest. My dad, in Spanish, the word molestar means to bother or annoy. So he used that and convinced my mom there was nothing else going on. So my mom never spoke to me about it again. And so for the next 2 years, I proceeded to still try and run from him. And I met this gentleman who was my friend at the time. And we started to notice that there was a deeper connection. And he took me out on a date. And when I turned 18, this is now when I'm 18, I rebelled. Like I thought, I'm an adult now and you can't tell me what to do. And I was still trying to get away from my dad. So he'd say, be home at midnight. I'd say, okay, great. I'll be home at 2, and I was just doing that. And my mom suffered a lot through it. She cried and she would ask me, why are you doing this? And I remember standing in the kitchen one day, looking at her in total like wonderment of like, how do you not know? Right. But having no words and then just leaving and keeping on with my actions. So that one day, this gentleman brought me home at 2 a.m. My dad was on the porch and he was furious. And from that, he told him, you get out. He told me, you get in this house. And he berated me all night that night. But the next day, my then boyfriend asked me a question that I'll never forget. He says, what was up with your dad? And I said, what do you mean? He was mad because you brought me home late. And he said, no, that was not an angry man. That was not an angry father. That was a jealous man. And when he said that, it opened up Pandora's box in me. And I probably shared with him more than he needed to hear. But at the moment that he still wanted to be with me now after knowing all my dirty, right? Because I had adopted the belief that I was now damaged goods, filthy, and no one would ever love me. Right. So the fact that he knew all of that and still wanted to be with me, I fell in love. And I was madly in love with him. And we, decided that we were going to make a life together. And he came from an abusive alcoholic mother. And he was the youngest of 4, the only boy. And he'd come home to find his sisters unconscious on the floor. It was that brutal. And so he thought, I'll, never let my kids see me drunk. And I thought my kids will never be molested. And we thought we fixed it. Right. And so we entered a marriage because I fell in love and I was going to move out. And at that state, my mom has very profound Catholic beliefs and she was not going to have her daughter live with a man and not be married. So I moved out Monday. We were married Friday. And I even remember that morning, he was just like, oh yeah, will you marry me? And we were he was 21, I was 18, and we were just madly in love. So we're like, okay, we talked about the white picket fence, the dog, and, the house, let's go do it. Right. And for the most part, we did. And, this next part of my story, I want to preface with the understanding that I have nothing but love and forgiveness and care for my ex-husband and my father. This story, I want to be clear that it's not to villainize them or, my father or my ex. I feel like I have a beautiful relationship now, and I just am witness to knowing that it was 2 young people that, really wanted to make a go of it. And for the most part, we did. Like, we have the 3 kids and we did what we could. He was a police officer for LAPD. And, it was that was in and of itself is a lot of, to bring into a marriage on top of all of the wounding that we had that we didn't know we were bringing an emotional state. So the only way he knew how to communicate was through anger, rage, vulgarities, and put downs, insults. And because my dad was that way a little bit, it kind of was familiar. And so it matched. It was a perfect match. But throughout it, the next 18 years got me to a place where I just felt I was stabbed everywhere I possibly could be stabbed. And there was nothing left. I bled out. There was nothing more to give. In the context of our marriage, we had 2-year span where there was 4 deaths all of a sudden, and they were all tragic. His uncle, who was 6'6.5", worked on the Puget Sound on a shipyard, stepped out on the boat, and those big, huge metal balls with the hooks underneath fell on his head. Like, he literally was under at the right time. Like, if he would have stopped to tie his shoe, you know what I mean? Like, and that happened. Then his partner, who was on bike detail with him, they rode bicycles up and down Hollywood Boulevard. got home from work, put on a John Wayne movie, laid down and had an aneurysm and died. And he left a 6-year-old and a 4-year-old, I think they were back then. And then we got that horrible knock at the door in the middle of the night that his sister had committed suicide. And so we're literally navigating all of that. And a year later, my brother was murdered. And so it was just a jolt, right, to the nervous system and to test everything that we had constructed and built, and not knowing how to navigate emotions, not knowing, that there was another way to process. We just were in it, and we were in it deep and together. And I knew how to be the victim, and he knew how to, navigate uncertainty through rage. And so it got to a point where it was no longer worth living to me. And I didn't kill myself because of my kids. I believe they're the only reason that I'm still here, because I wouldn't do that to them, but I was willing that it would happen. Right. And coming out of that and experiencing this level of kindness from these people, I was like, I don't know what this is. But again, if this feeling is available, and I know here I'm alive and there I'm dead, I got to seek what this is. And it gave me the courage to then get out of that relationship. And from that, it developed an insatiable hunger in me to understand human beings, right? I wanted to know why my dad did what he did, why my husband did what he did, and why I allowed it. And I started reading books. God bless authors. I want to bless all authors, because your books do matter, because there's something in there that might touch one human being like it did for me. One of the very first books I opened was The Unmistakable Touch of Grace by Cheryl Richardson. And it got me to see from a different perspective, a possibility that life could be different than the only life I knew, right? I didn't know that there could be anything else. On top of that belief, because he was so controlling and so jealous, because he never believed he deserved me, right? I was even more kept, right? And so to just have my eyes open that there could be another way. So I started reading, I started going to workshops, seminars, I was still going to therapy, and I was going to figure this out. I was going to crack this code. And subsequently it led me to Tony Robbins, to being a coach for Tony for 6 or 7 years, and which was amazing because at first I went through Coaches Training Institute and got certified there, but I was working full-time in the corporate arena trying to build a coaching practice on the side, and it just wasn't working. When I went to an event, and I was like, whoa, like it was a real estate event my sister took me to, and it was a gentleman who was teaching personal development, which I'd never heard of before. And at one point in the workshop, he said, my mentor, Tony Robbins. And I'm like, oh, well, if his mentor is Tony Robbins, I need to know who this Tony Robbins guy is, right? So I went on this search, and when I entered that environment and I went to an event, I'm like, oh my God, like I want to be a part of this community. I want to be a part of this kind of energy. I didn't know that this was available. And then going through that and becoming a coach from then, I've gone through apprenticing to be a shaman for a year. I've gone through my own spiritual journey, kind of evolved, moving past just mindset, but really understand the spirit's journey throughout this human experience, right? And really coming to that awakening. And to close the loop, in November of last year, so a little over 3 months ago, my little brother was murdered. And so it's kind of like one of those jolts in life where you literally take everything that you've learned and you apply it, right? You start to put it into practice, because yet here again is another like uppercut. And it was very interesting when my first brother was murdered. I turned my back on spirit, God, source, whatever your belief is. I was just so angry. And I'm like, what if there's nothing? Right. And with my little brother, luckily, my journey has brought me to a place of deeper connection to God, source, universe. And I believe that everything happens for our highest and greatest good, even the suck. And I don't believe that God wastes the pain. And so throughout this journey of gut-wrenching sorrow, seeking the good in it, the gift in it, the opportunity for me. What can I see in this moment? If God chose that both my brothers are to be taken and I'm still here, what can I do? And how can I alchemize this pain into something purposeful? And that's where I am today.
Wow, such an amazing, thank you so much for sharing that with us.
Of
And
course.
I can't imagine how profound people hearing this, what an effect it could have on other people on their own journey. And some of the places you must have been during those times. Do you mind me asking what that act of kindness was?
Sure. Yeah, I love sharing that. Throughout the whole time I was kept in my marriage, right? Well, I knew there was a sense of adventure in me that I hadn't tapped into, but I was a stay-at-home mom. I worked off and on. I had my own little t-shirt company business, and then I worked when the kids started going to school. And I just wanted more for my life. I had never done it. I got married at 18, so I didn't get to play. I didn't get to explore who Jessie is. I was just a wife and a mom, you know what I mean? And I wanted more. And so I lived vicariously on the other side of the yellow tape through my husband's experiences. I went on ride-alongs and all of that. And I thought, but I don't want to be a police officer. I'm not going to be throwing anybody up against the wall, And so I thought, what about firefighting? And my daughter says, Mom, you're going to see a little kid cry and you're going to start crying. And I said, I can appreciate that. And I think that if I know that I have a skill set to help them, I think I can maintain my emotions. So I decided to enter emergency medicine. And the first introduction to firefighting would be to take that course so I can kind of get a feel for it. And this class, I was terrified. Like, I'm the girl in the back of the classroom peeing her pants because the teacher's going to call on her, right? And so the minute he's like, oh, you have to stand up and introduce yourself, I'm like, oh, no, I'm nervous. And because my husband was jealous and I barely got to go, right? Because I had taken this other CERT class, which is Community Emergency Response Team that most communities have, and they teach you basic first aid and triage. He took it with me, right? So he could be with me, right? And then he was going to take this class with me, which he doesn't need because he's a police officer. He knows this stuff, but he just wanted to be able to be there with me. Anyway, it didn't work out with our schedule. So it was the first time I'd ever done anything on my own. And I was so nervous. And the teacher says, okay, this is a difficult course. This is about life saving, right? And so you're going to need group study. Okay. So, and I was like, oh man, I got to pick out all the women in the group because I can't, study with any men. My husband won't allow it. And it was that kind of feeling. So throughout the context of the course, I flunked. Okay. So what happened is my ex broke his leg in a motorcycle accident, his tib fib. And I was at the hospital in the morning before work. I would go on my lunch hour. I would go home, feed the kids, come back to the hospital, and I'd stay there till 11 o'clock at night. And I was studying a 10-chapter quiz and I flunked. And in that course, you can't flunk. You just can't. The teacher won't pass you because you're answering 911 calls. You know what I mean? So the teacher knew that there was something going on because this wasn't like me, right? And he came over and he said, look, after I shared with him what was going on, he said, okay, I'll make you an offer. He said, I will give you an incomplete instead of a fail if you promise to take the course again next semester. And I was like, oh my God, yes, for sure, right? So I was like on it. What he allowed me to do was audit the class. So it's half lecture, half scenarios. So because I was auditing, I became the patient for everybody. So he would put me under stairwells, underneath cars, and the students are plucking leaves out of my hair. And they're like, thank you so much. And that already, I was like, I'm just like doing these things that are terrifying me, right? At one point, he gave me a water bottle and he's like, okay, you're a drunk. Start walking around. And I'm like, oh my God, like I'm having to do these things that I would have never done, right? People are strapping me to a gurney. And I'm like, my husband saw I'd be dead, right? So I was kind of like moving through all these fears. And then what I had done is I back then, this is back in 2003, right? So nowadays we make movies on our phones, right? Back then I was taking pictures and I was putting them together in a compilation with music and the whole thing. And so I did this video of them where they came in with like mohawks and earrings and now they're standing at attention. And, as a gift, I was just kind of a techie that way. And they all pulled together and put money and bought me a Best Buy card. And that little act, right? Like it seems so simple, but that one act of like just me, it even brings me emotion now, like just being considered, just being thought of, just knowing that all of them came together and put money to give to me, right? My father had told me that people, want to take advantage of you. If you go to parties, they'll slip something in your drink and take, because that's what he was doing, right? And my ex told me people subconsciously want to break up a good thing, Jessie. So don't talk about our marriage to anybody. Right. So I always like walked with my head down. I didn't make eye contact. I always thought people were just there to take from you. And it had been my experience. And for them to do this without wanting anything in return, I was like, I don't know what just happened. But I knew that that Saturday class, I was alive. And when I would go home, I felt dead. I felt disrespected. Little things like a little dog that I had bought for me, and I wanted it to not be fed table food. I wanted it to not, play fight because it gets taught to get aggressive. And I remember coming home from one of the classes because I had to make lunch for everybody, because if I didn't come home from class and make lunch, God knows nobody would eat. Right. And so I came home and I remember all of those asks were totally not honored. And the play fighting was there, and all of that. And I was just like, it was that simple. It felt so surreal, the contrast of what I was feeling when I was in this class and what I was feeling when I would come home. And so that made me see from the perspective of my reality and what I was tolerating and what was no longer tolerable. Because if this emotion or this state of being was available to me, why am I not grasping it? Because here I'm dead. And that's what gave me the courage to take the next steps.
When I think about energy and vitality, I think about a kid. They have the energy to play, run around, climb things. That energy that feels like you just can't contain yourself. It's the stuff we've always wished they could just bottle up and sell to us, right? Well, this company's found a way to do just that. Amari's Happy Juice Pack. Mood, motivation, energy, things our bodies can naturally produce when both our guts and our brains are happy and communicating. And we can actually improve that process of communication across the axis of the gut and the brain. This is cutting-edge science. This is game-changing information. This is where science meets soul. This is Amari, and we're helping people feel better naturally. Check out the links in the show notes for discounts and more information. It's incredible. And amazing how you illustrated too how people can just be in such a place of normalcy, or what they consider normal.
Yeah.
And like just such a small thing of seeing outside of that box can make such a profound effect.
Yeah. And like, I want to anchor for your listeners, like those people, God, I wish I could find them. Like, they'll never know, right? They just behaved. And it's so important for us to recognize that we don't know the hell people are going through, right? Like, nobody knew what I was experiencing in my family. They were just being kind because that's who they are. And by virtue of doing that, woke up someone that is now dedicated and committed to helping people transmute their pain, right? They'll never know. And sometimes we don't get to know, but we get to behave and we get to believe that our kindness can literally change the trajectory of someone's life.
A couple thoughts came to mind, a couple questions, Jessie, is how long did it take you to start trusting again? Right. It's in my experience, it's not necessarily a one incident, and you're over and you start trusting again. It's a process.
Yeah, for sure. It was definitely a journey of unfolding. Really, I love Ram Dass's quote that says, "We're all just walking each other home." Right. So in my seeking, Cheryl Richardson had a part of awakening me. Tony Robbins had a part. The name of the gentleman at Heart Math Institute is escaping me right now, but he had a piece in it. So my therapist had a piece in it. So it's just a process of going and allowing the unfolding. And I think part of the important piece is that we're not in judgment as the unfolding happens, right? And we're the more and more we become aware of our emotional state or our thoughts, we can now be at the helm of choice, right? Now we can be at the operating system of the mind where we're recognizing there's a part of me that, wow, I want to tell my victim story so everyone can see how hurt I was, versus sharing it from like, hey, here's what happened, but here's what's possible. right? Which is victim to victor. And just being witness to, oh, like there's Jessie needing attention, right? So, oh, interesting. What part of her is needing that, and bringing love to the table? And the more, it's not about others, it's about self, right? It's about trusting Jessie, because again, it's like people are going to people and they're going to show up in whatever way they're going to show up. And it's not about, do I trust you? It's, do I trust myself to set boundaries? Do I trust myself to love myself enough to speak up when something's uncomfortable? Do I trust that? Because if I'm believing that my trust has to come into others, then others have power over my beingness. And then I lose that, and that creates insecurity, because now I'm depending on them to behave in a way that allows me to trust them, right? Which gives my power away. And it'll constantly have me seeking for the one person that's going to act in the way that I have this criteria or this rule book that says, now you can be trusted, right? It isn't about that. It's about having the sovereignty within yourself.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. That's very, very powerful. I have a similar question around forgiveness. You had mentioned, forgiving, and what you went through. For most people, the reaction just might be, that's unforgivable, but yet you found a way to forgive. Was that again like a one and done, or was it? Do you find it's a constant process of having to forgive people over and over again, but it only within yourself? Do the process.
So I think there's two parts. There's the part of forgiving other, and then forgiving self, right? For believing the story of the behavior, right? So my dad behaved, I wrote the story about my beingness. I was now filthy and gross and no one would love me, right? So I have to forgive myself for believing that about myself, versus seeing myself through God's lenses as divine perfection. Like nothing changed about me from the day I took my first breath. Nothing changed about anyone here that's listening. We are still that divinity. But in the process of our journey, we are creating these identity pieces or these stories about who we think we are, based on wanting to be loved and accepted, because that's our deepest goal. We want to be, we want to belong. We want all this sense. And so the process of forgiveness, it started to unfold as I started to fall in love with the aspects of me that went through the journey. And also, I think the deeper layers of forgiveness, I think ultimately will come into forgiveness leads into acceptance. And so when you come to that state of trusting that everything is in divine order, and I believe for our highest and greatest good, even the suck. And then I can see my father as a partner in this life with me, to be that darkness density or whatever, so that I could awaken to a deeper level of love, right? A deeper level of understanding, a deeper level of humility, a deeper level of seeing humanity through beauty, not through shame. Like I call shame the cosmic joke. Like, who invented the rules that we are to be ashamed of ourselves because of what? Because of whose rule, right? And I think it's a construct of our society, right? I was raised Catholic, and no offense, I honor everyone's beliefs. However, in the context of my Catholic upbringing, I had to make up lies to confess to the priest, which didn't feel good. And then you give penance, and then you come back next week for the next amount of sins that so it's just like, oh, like, so I am this wrong thing anyway. Forgiveness, I think, if I could share a quick little story.
Sure.
Absolutely.
So Neil Donald Walsh, are you guys familiar with Neil Donald Walsh? He wrote the books Conversations with God, and Conversations with God is a great series. I actually haven't read them. I picked one up once at a retreat, and I thought it was sounding pretty good, but I hadn't read. What I did read was one of his children's books. And this story, it brought such clarity, again, in the journey, right? He tells the story of the little soul and the sun, and that's the name of the book. And the little soul goes to God and says, God, I'm ready to experience life on earth. I'm really excited. And so God says, okay, great, let's get you ready. And God says, well, wait a minute. If we're going to have you experience life on earth, what do you want to experience it as? And so the little soul says, oh, I want to experience it as forgiveness. And God said, okay, great, let's get you ready. And he says, oh, but wait, if you're going to experience life as forgiveness, well, you're going to need something to forgive. And so then another little soul comes in and she says, I'll be that for you. And he says, why would you do that? Your light is so bright. You're so beautiful. Why would you do that for me? And she said, because I love you, but I have one favor. And he says, what? I'll do anything. And she says, I am going to be so good at helping you find forgiveness that I might forget how bright my light is. And I'm going to need you to remember. He said, I promise I will. And then another little soul showed up and said, I'll be that for you. I'll be that for you. And all these souls together came with that one little soul to help him find forgiveness. If we take that beautiful story and we acknowledge that every person that we come in contact with was in partnership with us to help us come to a different level of understanding and acceptance, we start letting go of blame. We stop letting go of wrongness and wrongdoing. You know, I could say, was it wrong my father did that? Well, in the construct of, yes, our human experience, yes, that would be considered wrong. In the construct of my spiritual awakening, it was a part of the depth of the darkness that I needed to go through so that I could experience the height of my light. And so the outcome, I think, in this lifetime is to be in the unfolding of that, to be witness to our divinity and the beauty of our light, especially in the depths of our darkness. In those moments that I was building traps for my father, I could say, poor little girl, how awful that she had to build traps, which is true. Or I can say, wow, how courageous was she, right? How resourceful and how creative. And here's the thing, I didn't know that I was going to need resourcefulness, courage, and creativeness when I was getting a divorce. And I had to find a place for my kids and I to live, right? So if anybody is going through darkness right now, if God could whisper to you and say, I know this really sucks right now, but if you knew that I need you to build resilience and why, because I know what's coming, you would understand. And we don't get to know. We just get to trust. And like Byron Katie, which I love, she says, you know, when you walk around saying that shouldn't have happened, she says, well, it should have because it did. And when you argue with reality, you lose 100% of the time, right? So if it happened, then I'm going to lean in on the side that God doesn't waste the pain. We do if we choose to. I can choose to look at my life as a way to keep me suffering. Because if I focus on that little girl that had to build traps to ward her off from her father, that kind of shrinks me, contracts me, and makes me feel sad. Or I can see the beauty within her and the courage and fall in love with her. And that expands me and allows me to fall in love with this being named Jessie so that I can merge her with my spirit. And now I can live my purpose of helping awaken others.
Beautiful. Thank you. What a shift. I hate to say paradigm shift because I think that term is overused a bit, but it really is, right? It's a completely different way of looking at the human experience.
Yes.
And this is exactly why we do what we do, right? Is to bring this knowledge, this idea, this possibility to our listeners and to our coaching clients. And so thank you. That is just such a powerful story. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
I don't know if it was just the energy and love that you shared through that story, but I got emotional.
Oh,
so powerful.
yeah.
Wow.
I appreciate it.
Is that a lot of what you're describing, changing from blame to acceptance and the honesty and not fighting reality, but shifting the way we're experiencing these things and trusting. Is that part of what it means to be fierce or to have fierce grace, as you call it?
Yes, I think so. I want to acknowledge that there is a humaning, right? And so like acceptance is ultimately where we want to get to, right? Like I became a total geek about people that have experienced NDEs, right? Near-death experiences. And I started like researching different stories, and it's uncanny how similar they all are. When you come down to it, and these are people that don't know each other, but what they got was, in fact, Dr. Zach Bush, which I love, he was talking about how he would be the doctor that would come in and resuscitate people when they flatline in the hospital. And what he found was he kept doing it thinking that's what he's there to do, but it was uncanny how many times people would come back and they'd say, why did you do that? He was like, what do you mean? Like, this is what I got to put you back. Like, isn't this the greatest thing? And it was because on the other side, they felt 100% acceptance. All of a sudden, the weight of being a mom, a dad, a woman, a insurance salesman, or whatever the roles that we play were lifted, and you were just this energy of love and acceptance. And I was like, wow, how can we bring that without dying? Like, how can we bring that total acceptance to the now so that we can live a life of fulfillment and a life of joy and a life of our limitless potential? And fierce grace is recognizing that we're not going to kumbaya our way. Like, we're not just going to sit on a mountain and not, we're still here to human, right? We're still here to have this experience. And so I believe forgiveness, I don't want to bypass that. Ultimately, if we come to acceptance, we accept that everything is in divine order. However, the human still needs that sense of knowing forgiveness, right? Still needs to forgive in the context of the person that never gave the apology. Because if not, our meaning maker in our brains says, well, that means I can't trust men, or that means I'm never safe, or whatever. When we come to that level of forgiveness, we release the shackles. And so I believe there's a fierce energy inside all of us. There's a deeper conviction to persevere. And sometimes we don't know what we've got until our knees hit the floor. Right. And in those moments that we just can't go on, there's a fierceness, there's a will to keep going and persevering. And we find that resolve. And I think grace is a part of embracing that beauty in a way that isn't pushing and force, right? Because in survival, sometimes we do it, we're just like, all right, fine, rip the Band-Aid off and I'm going to do the thing, right? And then we're exhausted. And then we get there, like high achievers will do this, right? It's just like they're constantly one achievement after the other, and they're exhausted, but they don't realize that they're not chasing the achievement. They're chasing the significance of being and worthiness on the achievement. So the achievement is never enough, because you're chasing the wrong thing. And so when we're able to see that depth of fierceness that we have in our spirit to keep going in this lifetime and to create the life that we deserve, that we are graceful with its presence, and that we don't swing the pendulum too far where we have this grr energy, or we're just like, get out of my way, I'm the bull in the china shop. And that the only way that I'm going to survive is by pushing through. Life shouldn't have to be a push through. I say when we get to those comfort zones and we want to push through, I say it's just an edge that needs to be softened. Right? It's just an edge that needs to be softened. Ooh, this is a little edgy. Okay, great. Just soften, bring love to that edge, and then keep going. And so that's the combination of the fierce and the grace. It's the dark, it's the light, it's the positive, it's the negative, it's the masculine, it's the feminine. And how do we flow in that infinity symbol of not or, but and, right in the middle? And we access both aspects of its power.
And is that how we get to the point of transformation? Or how would you describe that piece?
Yeah, well, so transformation definitely is going to be unique to the individual, depending on the level that they're at. Right now, at this stage of the game, back when I was going through this, we didn't have the plethora of information on the internet that we have now, right? Like, now people are Googling how to get out of depression or how to get out. The problem is that we're grasping onto information and not transformation. And what can happen to the human being is that there's so much information now, is that we start to stack. I use the analogy of a computer system, right? You want cutting edge software and the fastest internet available because you're going to do your online business, right? So you pay extra, you get the online, the fastest internet, and then you go on your computer and you see the spinning wheel of death. Right? And you're like, what the heck? I paid for fast internet. I want this result. But what happened is you open up your computer and you have old programming, right? The OS has not been upgraded. So it doesn't matter how fast the internet, you are going to glitch, right? So in this world of information, we're grasping all this personal development, we're grasping all this information, and we're stacking it on top of an old OS. And when we glitch, we have the sabotaging voice gets excited, right? Because that glitch invites for a deeper level of shaming. Why? Because now we know better. I read the books. I know I'm supposed to do positive affirmations, but here I am in a funk. Here I am sad. Here I am depressed. Here I am in rage again. What's wrong with me? Which used to be my primary question, right? And so it's important to realize that transformation is creating and upgrading the old program so that the default setting is now a different level, right? If we're all just walking each other home, it's a context of, I'm just here on the journey, right? And you're here, and maybe there's others here that I'll aspire to be, and it just keeps going, right? And the more process we do to serve ourselves, the more we can serve others. And in that, we start to pay attention to making sure that we're creating a new threshold, a new OS, by reprogramming that with which we want. So the default setting no longer feels comfortable, because sometimes we find ourselves in this depletion and we're like, God, well, why am I back here? Right. And some of the toughest questions we ask in coaching is, what is the benefit you're getting out of staying in that stuck place? Right. And then what benefit? I don't get benefit. I don't like it. And then I know, but you keep coming back to it. So, right. So it's like, how do we take that information and we upgrade the program so now it feels less comfortable going there because you're too witness to it? Right? My outcome is to help you see the unseen so you never unsee it. Because now you can't go there. You have to go to the new default setting of awareness. And that's where transformation begins.
I love that analogy too. We were just talking about we can do all the reading of books and downloading of, guides and step-by-steps and this and that. But until you actually start applying it to your life and living it and making it part of who you are or your operating system, it just becomes information on top of information.
Right.
Or we were calling it useful knowledge, but.
And that happened to me actually. One day I actually woke up in the morning and I got this like loud voice that said, write about compassion. I was like, compassion? And I was like, pushing it away. It was like, write about compassion. I'm like, okay, fine. So I sit down and I start writing. And what came through was interesting. It was about compassion of self. And I was at that moment where I was like, I knew all this personal development, but I was still finding myself attracting things that would shame me. So shame was still a part of my home. And I was being hard on myself and I was beating myself up. And so I was so committed to not being in the victim story that I wasn't offering compassion to the part of me that was going through it. And in the ability to give myself compassion and just notice that it's just some edges I need to soften, and that I wasn't going back to the old. I was coming back, I was dipping my toe in an old energy, but it wasn't an invitation to beat myself up. It was an opportunity for me to notice what else needed my love.
Yeah. Seeing that, or being in that place where you see the past, right? And maybe you slip slightly back into it. And that's probably not even the right term, but there's part of you that goes, yeah, you know what? That's not me anymore. That's somebody else. I'm somebody completely different now. And just for a split second, you may spend a minute in that place, but you're able to shift out of it much more quickly and come back into who you are now, which, we call your true self. I think that is a wonderful place to be, because you're not attached to that anymore, right? That's all in the past. I've survived that. I've walked through the fire, so to speak, and I've come out on the other side. And now through this transformation, I'm better. I'm in a better place, right? I've upgraded my operating system. I don't need to stay there anymore. Jessie, as we were preparing for the podcast today, I came across something on your website that struck me, and I'm a bit of a quandary over it. Live unapologetically,
Mhm.
and I'm not quite. Maybe you can help me out with this. What do you mean by living unapologetically?
Oh, I love this question. So the unapologetic you is all of you, and I say in your beautiful mess, right? So like there's such a judgment around who we are, how we show up, blah blah blah. So what if you were totally like, I'm not sorry. I'm not sorry that I'm passionate. I'm not sorry that I kind of have highs and I kind of have lows. And I'm not sorry that my desk, I want it squeaky clean, but sometimes it's a mess. Like I'm just being, right? Unapologetic. And I think that, God made you precisely in the way you are. In fact, I got the honor to meet this lady called Jen Bricker. And Jen is basically, she was born a torso. So she has no legs. And she came and spoke to a group of us. And there was a statement she said that I absolutely loved, because she was going through the quandaries of being born this way and what she was wanting to do with it. And she said, what if God made you this way on purpose? And thus she's taken, and she's a motivational speaker, and she does gymnastics and all this. So there's a beautiful story. If you ever want to hear a beautiful story, just Google her YouTube. And she shares the story of how she actually became a gymnast and met a sister she didn't know she had, and somebody that she was admiring. Anyway, and so when I think about unapologetic, I think you're up, you're down, you're silly, you're crazy, you're passionate, you're moody, you're everything. Like, what if you were made divinely on purpose the way you are, and that you just get to be, right? It's like I told my daughter one day, she was coming in with all these different things that she was trying to navigate. And I'm like, Shayna, you know what? Just be you. And she didn't like that answer, right? She's just like, oh, you always say that, right? She's like, what does that even mean? And I'm like, well, that's interesting that that's a question. But then she came home one day and she goes, Mom. I'm like, what? She goes, you know what's great about being me? What? She goes, I'm really good at it. like, like you are literally the expert at being a Shayna, right? So how amazing is that? So we get to show up unapologetic. We're not here to prove anything. And I want your audience to know, and you should write down, I have nothing to prove. That you are born in love. We are taught to hate. So if you come back to love and you recognize that that is who you are at your core, and you just rip the Band-Aid off of all the things that you think you need to be in order to be love, I promise you, love begets love. The more you show up in love, the more love you're going to get, the more love you're going to want to give. And I love the story of the movie Ghost with Patrick Swayze and Demi Moore, right? At the end of the whole movie, right as the light is coming in from, if you guys have, spoiler alert if you haven't seen it, but when the light is coming and he's looking at it and he knows he's being called, he looks at Demi Moore, and the last thing he says is, you know what? The love, you take it with you. Right? And it's like, that's it right there. We don't even take the human suit, let alone our belongings and our things and our homes and our cars and our all of that. Those are great things to have. I'm not knocking it. But what we take is the love we felt, the love we gave, the love we received. Like, be that, and all the ways that it shows up in who you are, right? Just be unapologetically you, all aspects of you. It's welcome here.
Oh, I love it. You know, one of the questions that came up for me here is, so you've got a married couple, two partners. One partner is on the path to upgrade their operating system, and the other partner perhaps they're not on that journey. That's not their path right now. They're not interested in it, and they perhaps are scared, are fearful of the other partner. We'll just use the term outgrowing them, right? So how does being unapologetic, or living unapologetically, kind of fit into that? You've got one person on the growth path and the other person not really supporting it. What are your thoughts around that type of situation?
It's a tough one. I never advocate for separation. However, I think that it's important to check in at where people are. For instance, I'll give you an example. I dated a gentleman who he was very pragmatic, very black and white, A mentality. And I even told him once, he goes, look, I'm black and white. This is the way I am. This is da da da. And I'm like, well, this is going to be really hard because I'm all about the gray. I'm all about the gray area, right? And just recognizing at the time we met, I was very needy and he was a rescuer. And it fit perfect like a glove, right? And as I started to evolve and I started to find out more about, the limits I had placed on my being, I call it heart armor. We have this heart armor around our hearts for a protection because we've been hurt before. And I started to peel back those layers and I started wanting more. I wanted to suck the juice out of life. I wanted to experience, I wanted to travel, I wanted to see the world. I had felt so kept. And in the evolution of me falling in love with myself, I was recognizing what else I was fueling my spirit. And he wasn't a bad person. I mean, he had an affair and blah, 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 whatever, but he wasn't a bad person. And I loved him. And we were trying to now come from this place of the wound that had happened and to come back together somehow. But I had expanded and grown so much that I realized he was very comfortable where he was. And he was limited by his own sense of protection. And his hurt was so profound. He's like, no, I'm fine. I'm successful under the construct of what society deems successful. I'm not in the poorhouse. I've got money in the bank. I'm healthy. I'm relatively fit. So from his model of the world, he was doing great. For my model of the world, I wanted expansion. I wanted growth. I wanted to be playful. I wanted to be a kid. He was the construct, dinner at the same time, TV, ice cream, walking the dogs on the weekend. Again, all great stuff for me when I'm 85. But right? And that'll be cool one day, but not for me. And so I just recognized that I started to tell him what I wanted because he would ask me. And then I was being wronged for it, right? So I have to go by Jessie's list of what she wants. And I'm like, well, no, but yes. I was like, I'm trying to ask for what I need, but you're wronging me for it. And then I got to this one specific moment where I was, again, with the best language I can give, just because he kept chasing me and didn't want the relationship to end. And I didn't either, honestly. I loved him, but I knew that it couldn't continue the way it was because I knew that there would be a part of me that would die. If I settled and I just decided to sit on the porch and, walk the dogs and watch Wipeout, I knew that there would be a part of me that I was turning off. And I wasn't willing to be the sacrifice anymore. A very smart mentor told me once, get off the freaking cross. We need the wood. And so I was having this conversation with him in my best language, trying to explain to him. And I swear to goodness, it like the cartoon, I saw a huge question mark over his head. And I was like, I am harming him more than I'm doing good by staying. Even though he doesn't believe it, right? He's like, no, we can do it, right? Like I'm harming him because he's feeling like he can't win with me. And so it was starting to make him feel less of a man. And I realized in that moment that I was wanting him to be something he was not going to be. And like we say, when people show you who they are, you have to believe them, right? And in that moment, I realized, you know what? You deserve somebody to love you exactly where you're at. Because one, it's not in my power to change anybody. Two, I'm not falling in love with someone's potential, right? It's just he's beautifully where he's at. There's no wrong in it. It just wasn't for me anymore. I wasn't in that place of neediness. And part of him having the affair was he didn't feel significant anymore because his model was, I need to rescue. You don't need rescue anymore. I need to go rescue somebody else. And he would get that through an affair, right? So again, there was all these things that I was now witness to because as I was growing, I was like, oh, this is what's going on. And I understood it, but he didn't want to move through it. And that's okay. No harm, no foul. I love him anyway, but it was not going to work within the context of our relationship anymore.
Thank you. That's very powerful and profound. The question that also came up for me, Jesse, is what keeps people from living the life they truly want? I mean, we hear all about all these great ideas and all the programs that are out there, but what's the friction point that you see most often?
The belief that they can't have it, right? I think that we have stopped dreaming, right? There's a level of don't dream so big. Get real, right? Be realistic. You're never going to get there. Like, I remember the same gentleman, I wanted a BMW convertible. I was riding a little Toyota Rav. And he's like, back then it was like 50 grand. He's like, that's an expensive car. You'll never be able to do that. And I thought, tell me I can't, so I can say, watch me. Right. But there's dream stealers, right? And it's not always because they're bad. They just have given up on their dreams as well. And so we stop believing that we could have a life of just joy and abundance like for me, like at this stage of my life, I want to live with moments of awe. Right? I want to seek those moments. Like, God created this planet with so much beauty, and I find awe in its beauty, but I also find awe in the beauty of a smile or a baby giggling, or a tender touch, those things that bring us back to our center. And so I think one of the things that stops us is from believing that we can have it. And you can. I believe there's no limitation to the human being except the belief that there is one.
Yes. Dream big. I love it, right? We hear about, maybe this is the wrong context, but we see, this is going back to the material world, right? Is we see all these things on TV, all these lives of the rich and famous, these things that we're supposed to want because society tells us they're important. But in truth, the things that we really should want, at least in my opinion, are within us and within us to share with our loved ones, the people who we associate with, that we let into our lives. So thank you. That is brilliant.
Well, I've coached billionaires, like literally, who have come to coaching and said, can you teach me how to just be? Because I've been doing my whole life. And they're on their fifth marriage. Their children don't talk to them, and they're tired of hiring a massage therapist just for physical touch. Right? So these people can buy an island, but they are poor in their spirit. So we have to pay attention to that and realize that whatever it is in the most profound moments of your quietness, when you're dreaming and seeing a life that you wish you had, it is totally within reach.
I think you've illustrated beautifully some of what I'm going to ask next. But if you could put, just into a few words, what makes the Fierce Grace method different from other coaching programs out there?
Because I believe that there are coaching models, and this isn't about a coaching model. It's about a beingness. It's about connecting to that part of us beyond all the heart armor, right? That beautiful divinity that's under there that you've forgotten about because you've been protecting your whole life, and you're now living through filters of who you think you need to be. And then we spend our lives unraveling all of that to find we were the divine perfection we always were, right? So what we are going to do is we're going to unravel that. It's not therapy. We're not going to the past to linger there. We're just going to go to find where the actual meaning was made. Where was that defined moment that there was a piece of armor that was created? And I feel like there's different pieces of thread. You have a quilt or a piece of fabric where there's this thread, and you pull it and it just comes up and it comes out. And it was like, oh, why did that get in there? It's those threads in our, as my daughter calls it, the divine choreography of our life, that were placed. What if they were placed strategically there by source or our creator to be those moments to either choose limitation or choose expansion? In our unconscious conditioning, we chose limitation oftentimes. You ever wonder why you have two kids in the same household and one thrives and the other one doesn't? Right? And sometimes the one that thrives is more from the context of having to prove in survival, which is okay, you built a muscle. But what we don't realize is that we keep calling in stressful situations so that we can push through, so that we can show ourselves that we got it, right? So the outcome is, in the journey of all of those threads, there was another story. There was another courageous, beautiful soul. There was a resilient being, somebody decided to persevere and still be kind. Like, so let's unravel that and get to the real truth. It's like people say your past does not equal the future. And I say it can, if you choose what you grab from it. And I believe that if you don't choose the gifts in the journey, even in the most profound pains, and I want to honor and respect, people have gone through some heinous things, but there's always a light if you seek it. And even in the context of my recent brother's murder, because I'm now a seeker of where that light is in some of the most profound depths of sorrow, I was witness to my family coming together in a way that they never had. I was witness to strangers posting on Instagram about my brother, sides of him I didn't even know. I was witness to so much beauty, even people that looked like they were gang members, that possibly were, who were showing up with complete compassion and love. And so there's that, right? That's also present. And one of my favorite quotes that I love saying, it's not a quote, but I kind of took it from what he said, which was Mr. Rogers. When 9/11 hit and parents were watching on repeat those airplanes hitting the buildings, it was causing fear in the children. And so he would get down on their level and he'd say, you know what? Whenever there is chaos, there's helpers. Look for the helpers. Right. And when you think about that, in the midst of such catastrophic events, there's firefighters running into the fire. There's strangers holding other strangers' hands because they're literally might be their last breath. Like, there's all this beauty in the midst of this horrific situation. There are those streams of light, and if we seek them, we will find them. And my belief is that that is what our journey is for, to not stay stuck in the pain, because if you look for the light, you will find it, and if you don't seek it, you will only remember the pain.
Just got chills. I'm going to schedule my breakthrough call.
Jessie, I want to allow you some time to talk about your coaching program, which you just touched on, but also you run some retreats, and I love the title here, but I'll let you take it away and tell us what it's about, because I think it's pretty cool.
Which retreat are you referring to?
The Healing is Sexy.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. I'm so excited, because those are the two things at this point. I'm going to offer a Fierce Grace retreat, but it probably won't be until late July. But right now, and part of what evolved out of my little brother's death was stopping the avoidance of talking about healing, right? Because there's all this stuff that we want to put in a construct. Oh, who am I to be a healer? Who am I to be someone that talks about spiritual awakening, right? It's just like, and I feel this constant like nudge from God going, you keep asking me what your purpose is. I keep telling you and you keep ignoring it, right? Yeah. And so I was like thinking about healing, and I was thinking about, where my brother's mindset was. Where's the mindset of the guy that killed him that we still have to go to court for? Like, what happened? What happened in his childhood? I want to understand. And I was walking around my office, and I'm like, you know what? Healing is sexy. Like, right, because a turned on human being is just delicious, right? It's like catnip to the spirit. It's like, oh, I don't know what it is about you, but I just you seem like you're in joy all the time. You seem like you're smiling all the time. You seem like so how can we get through this healing process so that we can start to literally love life again? It's like another quote that I love. I have these quotes all of a sudden. Howard Thurman, which is, don't ask what you could do for the world. Ask what makes you come alive, and go do that, because we need more people to come alive. And that's what I'm here to do. And healing is sexy. It's an opportunity, if you could imagine being catnip to the spirit, right? Where you unplug this cosmic freaking plug that has you in some sort of construct or limitation or belief system or rules, or that says that you are not the divine perfection that you were created in. Then you're living a life of limitation and a life of belief that you're not enough, or that you have to look a certain way or be a certain way. And God knows society feeds of that stuff. And we compare ourselves. And now you got all these filters on TikTok and She's like, you don't even know what's real anymore. You know what I mean? And it's just like, I'm like, what if whatever you believe is the apex of success and beauty, what if you can find that within, so much so that you ever see somebody who's by the construct of society standard gorgeous, but has a really ugly attitude? Right? The beauty automatically goes down. Yeah, she's pretty, but or the other way around. Someone who by society standard is kind of average, but their spirit is on fire and they're just like, oh my God, you are gorgeous, right? So again, we've been sold a story about who we think we are. So you know what? Healing is sexy. And that's something I've had to own too in the construct of my own evolution and healing process of my dad's sexual abuse. How do I fall in love with what I consider to be my body was my biggest pain? It was what I believed that it attracted my father in the wrong ways. With my husband, I had to be the trophy wife, but then if I got attention, he would get in fights. And so then I'd gain weight, and then he'd be like, hey, babe, you put on a few pounds. Are you sure you're going to eat that? And so then I'd lose weight, then I get attention, and then he'd get in fights. And it was this vicious thing. I just wanted to wreck this thing called this vehicle of my body. And so I had to learn to fall in love with Jessie so that the outward expression of me was just kind of like the thing that people see, but it wasn't what made me. And so what I did with Heal and Grow Rich, which is the URL, healandgrowrich.org, is a 3-day immersion with me. I'm answering the call, God, source, universe. I'm answering the call because in the construct, all the stuff that I've done, I've done it so that I can give it back, right? And so I want you to come spend 3 days with me, and we're going to go through a spiritual evolution. We're going to go through a cleansing. We're going to go through a breaking down the heart armor. We're going to be awakened to, I just had this experience with this gentleman last weekend, and he was sitting there, and I'm like, he was like recognizing himself, and I'm like, isn't it yummy? And I'm like, being in that deliciousness, right? And he was like, wow. And he had this smile on his face. It was just so gorgeous. And I'm like, that's it right there. So let's do it. Come in 3 days. You got to be willing to and on my website, I have who this is not for. You have to be willing to be vulnerable. Like who it's not for is if vulnerability scares you. If you're still stuck in the blame game, and if you're not willing to let go of the story. I love you, but it's not our time. Now, if you are ready to really seek within and to really look inside and see the magnificence of your beingness and to really fall in love, then let's do this. It's a 3-day immersion with me. Come and let's really go in through some deep, profound work. And then Fierce Grace is my 10-week program where we go step by step, and it's modules and it's group setting. And so it kind of creates community around that. So it's also very profound. But it's just those two things that I want to be able to offer people to help them come to their own greatness.
Beautiful. And you mentioned one URL. Where else can our listeners find you?
Oh, yes. Unshakablelife.com. And that's unshakable with an E. It's spelled both ways, which is very interesting, but it's unshakable with an E, life.com. So there you will find all the information about me. It'll show you a masterclass and how you can book a call with me.
Wonderful. Well, we're very grateful for you taking your time today and bringing the energy and the openness, the vulnerability, and just sharing your story. It's a very uplifting story, seeing where you were to where you've come to the point you've come to. So thank you so much.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And if I have anything last to close, I'd say, decide to either fuel your dream or fuel the reasons why you can't. Mm-hmm. The option is yours, and you're always at the helm of choice, and trust that your dream can come true like it did mine. Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.